In this PowerPoint, I will introduce you to a planning cycle that can be helpful when planning for workplace learning. The cycle has two cycles within it. In the first cycle, we clarify outcomes for learning, the purposes and outcomes for learning, and design learning, opportunities and access to learning. So there's this iterative process, this back and forth movement between these two things as you work on. And then that feeds into the second cycle, which is planning about who will facilitate the learning, when it will take place, where it will take place and how, and also building evaluation processes. Plan is implemented and there's a constant monitoring and evaluation process. And then that in turn feeds back into the first cycle where you're maybe making constant adjustments to your purpose and design. And of course, they're also helpful when you roll out the process for a second time or more. So in the next few slides, what I have on the right is an example from a retail fashion store, and on the left I have an explanation of the key purposes. So let's start with cycle 1 and clarifying the purposes and outcomes for learning. The purpose, we need to ask what is the issue. So describe the problem and then think about how will solving the problem or issue contribute to the organisation. In the retail store, the problem or issue was described as floor staff having poor knowledge of the products. There was a current system of training. Managers were trained through lectures and then they passed on the information to their floor staff, but it wasn't working. The other issue was that staff were from diverse backgrounds across Asia and not all had good English conversational skills. So by addressing this issue, they decided that their purposes were to increase sales, to increase staff confidence and to develop staff English skills. So these were the purposes of the program. The second part of cycle 1 is to clarify, or part of the first part of cycle 1 is to clarify the outcomes for learning. And here you need to think about who the learners are, and there may be different groups. Think about what the learners need to do, to know, to understand and be. The answer to this question may be different for each group of learners. So this is what we mean by outcomes. In the retail store, for the managers, they wanted them to become a coach, to know and understand their staff's strengths and limitations, and have really good product knowledge. They wanted them to be encouraging, contribute to and carry out the learning plan, and of course to teach others. For the shop floor staff, they wanted them to understand fashion and fashion terminology, to develop product knowledge, and to be confident in advising customers, and of course to improve their English conversation skills. This applies to some staff more than others, of course. Learning outcomes can be something that's quite difficult to grasp, but if you think about it in practical ways of what you want the individual learner or the group to be able to do, to know, to understand and be. And remember, the being includes what we talked about before, the vocational way of being, the ways in which you, for example, interrelate with customers, the sort of attitudes and interaction with others, etc. So in the second cycle, where we look at the first element, planning who, when, where and how, you've already planned who your learners are, but who will facilitate the learning? And where in the workplace can learning take place? For example, at the working station, on the production line, in a quiet space. So most of the time it can be as the work is taking place. In a retail store they chose to do it somewhat differently. How in the workplace can learning take place? Which learning strategies best fit the purpose, the the learners and the workplace and the skills of those supporting the learning. All of these things need to be considered. So in the shop, in the retail store, what they did was to pay staff to arrive 30 minutes earlier so that they can conduct these 30-minute sessions 3 times a fortnight. And in terms of how they did it, first of all, they conducted a pre-self-test on knowledge and advising customers, which they then used as part of their evaluation later on. They scaffolded the learning by breaking down the topic. For example, the use of colour, terminology, the types of cloth finishes and so on. They provided English phrases that use the terminology and product knowledge, and they put this all together in a visually appealing summary of the product knowledge chart, and this they pinned to the wall in the storeroom so it was readily available and accessible. Then they also had, during their 30-minute sessions, a Let's Dress You Up, a mix and match activity, where each staff member provided constant feedback, and this culminated in a mix and match competition where staff presented their selected outfit to the team, and in doing so they used the terminology. And in the process of all of this, staff and managers observed each other and gave feedback and encouragement. And this had very positive outcomes in terms of developing a team spirit that wasn't there before. So now moving to the second cycle, where we implement and monitor. The implementation of the plan, you've already considered the barriers and enhancers, but there will always be unexpected issues that will arise. But there's also sometimes nice surprises. And in terms of the evaluation, we're asking there, how do you know that the learning plan or program, whatever you want to call it, is actually successful? So this is why you need to develop an evaluation plan when you design your learning. So the evaluation happens constantly throughout the whole process. And it's always best, of course, to keep these things simple and straightforward so they are easy to do. There's sometimes confusion of assessment of learning and evaluation of the program, so we unpack that a bit here too. So in the retail store, in terms of assessment, what they did was to identify the learning outcomes, which we talked about earlier. And remember, they were to understand fashion and fashion terminology, develop product knowledge, be confident, and improve English conversational skills. They conducted a post-program self-rating test, if you like, on fashion knowledge and advising customers. There was constant observation of each other and constructive feedback given. This is part of assessment too. They provided a quiz and they had the competition. So it's this constant assessment that's based on assessment for and as learning and feedback. It's not a simple test at the end. It's much more than that, and it feeds into the learning. The evaluation of the program, you can think about constantly throughout the process, what are the challenges and surprises. So if we go back to the purposes of the program, which we also mentioned at the beginning, they were to increase sales, increase staff confidence, and develop English skills. So then the question is, did that take place? If you use simple but hard measures such as the increase in sales, it doesn't really answer your question, because it's much more complex than that. Sales are subject to other economic pressures, things like the time of the year and those sorts of things as well. So we need more complex measures about whether or not the evaluation took the purposes of the program were met. Confidence you could see in the staff through your observations, as you could with the English skills. So any increase or decrease in sales can be considered against these other outcomes. So your outcomes need to be much more complex than just simple measures in numbers. Okay, all the best.